They say there's nothing new under the sun. You could probably say the same about the moon. You could argue the moon has secrets the sun never knew, and the sun's secrets lie in the shadows where light doesn't penetrate. But even more mysterious are the secrets that sit in open daylight. It should be no secret that even the children who were taken into captivity by the heathen had fully adopted their wicked ways. The Sepharvites sacrificed their children, burnt them with fire in ritual slaughter to the gods Adramelech and Anamelech, and the people of the land were doing the same thing. Not only burning their children and worshiping images and statues, but also eating their children. By the time of the heathen takeover, the people have been explicitly warned about such things. If they continued, punishment is coming. This was not a secret. This was prophecy. Second Kings chapter 17, verse 13. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and all the seers, saying, Turn ye from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. Notwithstanding, they could not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their God. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them, that they should not be like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel, which they made. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of spoilers, until he had cast them out of his sight. For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord, and made them sin a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, and he said, by all his servants and prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their land to Assyria unto this day. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cuthah, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and he placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel.
And of course, we mentioned cuneiform. This is at Quaker City, Ohio. This tablet was found, and it was validated by Professor, where's he at? David Owen at Cornell. And he said this is a 2000 BC tablet from Ur.
The king of Assyria could be considered somewhat of a secret. Who was he, and where exactly would be Assyria today? Just as with most cases in history, empires expand and invade new territories, and that previously named territory retitled under the control of the invader, more specifically, the king. For example, Rome, which encompassed at one time nearly every coastal region of the Mediterranean, almost half of Europe, and even parts of the Middle East. One could say Rome, even from its earliest days, comprised of a multitude of ethnicities under one king, Caesar. When they conquer a land of different ethnicities, their monarch becomes the king of the land, and that name is expanded and the people become vassals to him. Another example, King James, or King Philip, or King Charles, Holy Roman Emperor. Around the year 1500, this title was held by the likes of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. In this example, the term Assyrian should not be conflated with Syrian. Although they overlap somewhat in genealogy and location, Syrian describes most currently a country in the Middle East and the people who hail from there. On our journey, we will learn the location of the true Assyria. However, the biblical etymology is representative of two particular sons of Shem, mostly Ashur, and to a lesser extent, Aram. Be this as it may, these people today are Hamites and Canaanites. Oh yeah, and Japhethites. An effective way of deciphering these people today is by their religious classifications. The majority of Syrians today are Muslim, and that sect identifies themselves with Aram, son of Shem, while the sect who identifies themselves as Assyrian under the progeny of Ashur are a majority so-called Christians, or more accurately, Syrian Chaldean Catholics. Ashur, the namesake of Assyria, is also deified in the Assyrian pantheon as the winged sun god, one of the most widely common examples of Assyrian folklore. Babylonian should also not be confused with the location of the Tower of Babel. Although the tower is the first mention of Babel in Genesis, the tower was destroyed and abandoned. And from there, in that moment, the people were scattered to the lands of their inheritance throughout the earth. It isn't until after then that Babylon would emerge in a different location, with mostly an amalgamated identity. Nimrod was a Cushite, but ruled in territories of Shem, specifically Ashur, Aram, and Elam. But mysteriously, there is no mention of Lud or Arphaxad in the King James Version. In reference to Nimrod and the tower, Genesis 10:10 says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Ashur, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. Babylon, in the context of scriptural foundation, has dual meaning. The first and most obvious is location, and the second which should really be the first, is the state of confusion, particularly through language. In the generations to come, Babylon exchanges hands several times, from the Persians to the Greek, and eventually the Romans. Although Ashur may have been the Assyrian deity of reverence, there was another goddess ranked above him, Ishtar. She is the chief goddess in the Babylonian cult of rituals, also known as the Queen of Heaven, mentioned by title in the Book of Jeremiah. Just like the Assyrians amalgamated into different cultures, their pantheon of gods did likewise. Today, the Queen of Heaven is widely regarded as the Virgin Mary. The Book of Jeremiah, chapter 44, verse 15, quote, Then all the men which knew that their wives had burned incense unto other gods, and all the women that stood by a great multitude, even all the people that dwelt in the land of Egypt and Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, As for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Lord, we will not hearken unto thee, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the city of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. But since we left off to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine. And when we burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings unto her, did we make her cakes to worship her, and pour out drink offerings unto her without our men? Then Jeremiah said to all the people, to the men and to the women, to all the people which had given him that answer, saying, The incense that ye burned in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, ye and your fathers, your kings and your princes, and the people of the land, did the Lord not remember them, and came it not into his mind? So the Lord could no longer bear because of the evil of your doings, and because of the abominations which ye have committed. Therefore is your land a desolation, and an astonishment, and a curse, without an inhabitant, as at this day. End quote. Jeremiah 44 relates that after being warned by the prophet to stop worshiping strange gods, and especially burning oblation to the Queen of Heaven by the God of their fathers, the men and women outright refused and blamed their current misfortune on the fact that they had refrained from worshiping Ishtar. With divine permission, Jeremiah issues the prophecy for the destruction of Judah and Egypt by the invading Babylonians to the north. It is clear at this point that the God of Israel had turned his back on his people and instead sided with Babylon. So the conquer and captivity of the tribes should have been no secret, and neither were the abominations mentioned in the histories. But not all tribes fully adopted the heathen's lifestyle, and these people were preserved, but also carried away from their land into Assyria. As mentioned in the last episode, modern genomic evidence proves that the Mediterranean, North African, South Sephardic bloodlines were the earliest European lineages to infiltrate the Americas. And of course, these bloodlines parallel the first families to invade via Babylon during the first captivity of Israel, prior to Judah. According to the second book of Kings, chapter 17, the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, Cuthah, Avah, Hamath, and from Sepharvaim. The men from Avah, aka Avites or Avim, were early generation Philistines. During the days of Abraham, their king was named Abimelech, which most likely is a title of a Philistine king rather than an actual name. In this title, Abimelech, we see a multiplicity of parallel stories involving Abraham, Isaac, and Pharaoh. These accounts require further scrutiny in order to gain contextual insight. This name is mentioned twice in Genesis, relating to different times and situations that are eerily familiar. In Genesis chapter 20, Abimelech is a king on Abraham's journey south. In this account in Genesis, Abraham says Sarah is his sister, and Abimelech takes her for his own. But God comes to Abimelech in a dream and intervenes. Behold, thou art a dead man for the woman which thou hast taken. Abimelech returns Sarah to Abraham untouched and bestows gifts upon him, including oxen, sheep, men and women servants. And because of this act, Abimelech and his house received favor. Of course, this story sounds almost the same as the prior account in Genesis 12 that took place between Abram, Sarai, and Pharaoh, as opposed to Abram, Sarah, and Abimelech. These accounts bring a significant question to the forefront. Why is this same story being told multiple times? Later in Genesis, we have another similar account, this time involving Rebekah and Isaac. In this scenario, the Lord tells Isaac not to go into Egypt, but go to Gerar to sojourn. And again, in this situation, Isaac tells the men of the land, Philistia or Gerar, that Rebekah is his sister. But she isn't, where Sarai was technically Abram's sister. Rebekah was Isaac's cousin. However, later they were caught sporting by Abimelech. And again, this duplicity pays off because Isaac waxed great in this land and received in the same year 100-fold. Parallelism aside, these accounts highlight the relationship that Abimelech had with both Isaac and Abraham, for whom they both made covenant with. This parallelism should also further highlight the need for chronological and contextual understanding. These early generation Philistines were sons of Mitzrayim, more specifically Casluhim, also considered a division of the early Egyptians. But as Deuteronomy 2:23 relates, they were destroyed and usurped by the Caphtorim. The Caphtorim Philistine connection should be considered a different group altogether. These Avim worshipped Nibhaz, a god with a human body and the head of a dog, and Tartak, a god with a human body and the head of a goat. The men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth. The men of Cuth made Nergal. The men of Hamath made Ashima. All of these gods are said to be pre-Babylonian, Assyrian, Mesopotamian, or Akkadian. The gods of Egypt, Greece, and Rome are said to begin here. Over time, these gods and images became repurposed into the ruling cultures. This initial group mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 17, men from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, were transplanted by the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser, after Israel was taken into the first captivity into Assyria. These groups of men resettled by the king of Assyria brought their gods to the land and constructed their shrines in the high places. These men were placed in Samaria, a city founded by King Omri, who was the sixth king of Israel. Omri is one of many kings who saw their early demise due to his own wickedness. His son, Ahab, continued evil by constructing a house of Baal in Samaria. During this period of time of Assyrian domination, the greater heathen worship of strange gods impregnated the tribes to the point that nearly every generation of Israel had an evil king, while Judah, on the other hand, had some kings that would be considered righteous, thus delaying their inevitable captivity. When we look at the earliest indigenous roots of America, the ancestry must be broken up into different categories chronologically. Since the first Assyrian invasion of a divided kingdom, the majority of the northern tribes descended from Joseph and Ephraim. They lived in Samaria. These were the groups taken into Assyria and supplanted by the Avites, Babylonians, and Sepharvaim. As most biblical sources put it, this was the first mass intermixing of Gentiles on the land since the days of Exodus. Chronologically, the Exodus is over a millennia after the days of Abraham. Just to put the timeline into perspective, the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah is 500 years after Exodus, and there's over 100 years between the first and second Assyrian takeovers. The Assyrians played a foundational role in the rituals of the polytheistic pantheon that subsided through several cultures from Babylon to Egypt to Greece to Rome. But even more than the idols of Babylon, the true narratives of the hidden stories seem to subsist throughout the Quran and rabbinical Judaism. It's important to note that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are all considered Abrahamic religions. The Quran tells the story of Terah, Abraham's father, and his idolatry. So does the Midrash, but their accounts are not mentioned in the King James. Both of these accounts in the Quran and Midrash are taken as their own credible, legitimate sources. The narrative about Abram and Terah not mentioned in the canonized version of Scripture. But as we know, because we have learned, both the Quran and the Midrash took these accounts directly from the Book of Jasher. Quote, the Quran states that the people of Abraham were idolaters. When Abraham was a young boy, he decided to finally teach his community a lesson. He said to himself that he had a plan for their idols whilst they were gone away. The Quran goes on to narrate that Abraham subsequently broke the idols, all except the largest, which he kept intact. When the people returned, they began questioning each other over the wreckage until some of the people remembered that the youth Abraham had spoken of the idols earlier. When Abraham arrived The people immediately began to question him, asking him whether he had anything to do with the broken idols. Abraham then, in a clever taunt, asked the people as to why they do not ask the largest of the idols, which they believed could indeed hear and speak. The people of Abraham were then confounded with shame and admitted that the idols were incapable of anything. End quote. Quote, Terah left Abram to mind the store while he departed. A woman came with a plate full of flour and asked Abram to offer it to the idols. Abram then took a stick, broke the idols, and put the stick in the largest idol's hand. When Terah returned, he demanded that Abram explain what he had done. Abram told his father that the idols fought among themselves and the largest one broke the others with a stick. Why do you make sport of me? Terah cried. Quote from the Midrash. The Book of Jasher is mentioned in the 10th chapter of the Book of Joshua. Chronologically, this means it was already in compilation just after Exodus and before every other book mentioned afterwards. The narrative of Abraham begins long before the Tower of Babel, but that narrative isn't mentioned at all in the accepted King James Version. In fact, nothing is mentioned about Terah and Nimrod's relationship in chapter 11 or chapter 12 of Genesis. But Jasher relates that not only was Nahor Terah's father and Peleg's great-grandson, prince of Nimrod's host, but Terah had also been elevated by Nimrod. Terah was an idol worshiper, to which we get the idol smashing story hijacked by the Quaran and Midrash. After the destruction of the tower, the sons are scattered on account of their sin into many divisions into all four corners of the earth. This signifies a new chronology as it comes to the nations and locations following the days of Peleg, when the sons of men and the earth divided. Jasher chapter 10 verse 30 says, And some of the children of Shem, son of Noah, father of all the children of Eber, also went and built themselves cities wherein they were scattered, and they called their cities after their names. Continuing, and the sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. And they built themselves cities and called the names of all of their cities after their names. Chapter 10 goes on to explain how Ashur, son of Shem, and a large number went to a distant land which they found, and they built 4 cities, and they named it after their occurrences: Nineveh, Resen, Calah, and Rehoboth. And the children of Ashur dwell there unto this day. Also, the children of Aram went to build Uz, and dwell there unto this day. The children of Ashur are the Assyrians, who after the fall of the tower went to a distant land, meaning they went not only away from the land of their inheritance and their brethren, but also away from the land of Shinar. Nimrod, also called Amraphel, at the time may have been considered the most evil man on earth. But after the destruction of the tower and the division of the lands, that title was exclusively designated to his son, Mardan. Jasher states Mardan, Nimrod's son, added to the abominations of his father. Therefore it is said, from the wicked goeth forth wickedness. Mardan was eventually deified by the Babylonians as the patron deity of Babylon, today recognized as Marduk, or Jupiter, in the Assyrian pantheon, rather than Mardan, the name given in Jasher. After this, Amraphel, aka Nimrod, goes against Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, who conquers him and kills his son Mardan. Victorious, Kedorlaomer confederates with Arioch, king of Elasar, and Tidal, king of the Goyim, And this is where Genesis 12 picks up in the King James Version, when the Lord told Abram to leave his country and his father's house and travel to the land of Canaan. From this moment, there would be another 1,500 years until the descendants of Abraham would rule. From David to Zedekiah, the kingdom only ruled itself independently less than 400 years. The first captivity of northern Israel by Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, saw these tribes displaced from the land, never to return. But Babylon was later conquered by Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, whom immediately restored the temple and the remnant of the Jews back to Jerusalem. Not only had Cyrus done this, but he also returned seemingly everything stolen from the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. Over time, the Persians would attempt to frustrate the remnant in the rebuilding of the temple throughout the reign of Ahasuerus Artaxerxes and until the reign of Darius II. They were asked in those days what right they had to build the temple, to which they referred to the decree of Cyrus. After a search, the decree was found and the agreement upheld. Quote, Book of Ezra, chapter 6. Quote, Also, I have made a decree that whosoever may alter this word, let timber be pulled from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged on it, and let his house be a dunghill for this. And the God that hath caused his name to dwell there destroy all kings and people that shall put their hand to alter and destroy this house of God, which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree. Let it be done with speed. Jerusalem operated somewhat peacefully under Persian rule until the arrival of Alexander and the Greek. His arrival marked the beginning of Hellenization. If Israel went into Assyria unto this day, where is Assyria? If we use their maps and their history, these people would be the lost northern tribes of Israel. Do you think these people are Israel? Babylonian Jews or Iraqi Jews who live in modern-day Assyria claim their lineage extends over 2,500 years to the first Assyrian captivity. According to modern genomic research, the Babylonian Jews of modern-day Iraq are Cauco-Hamites, who mostly descend from bloodlines out of the Caucasus, but also some Hamitic ancestry from North Africa as well. These people have minimal amounts of sub-Saharan African ancestry, meaning their progenitors were Neanderthals whose ancestors procreated after the scatter of the nations. These modern-day Iraqi Jews claim to be of the lineage that was exiled to Assyria. However, nearly all genetic studies point to India as a founding population of this particular region of ancient Mesopotamia. These people don't consider themselves Sephardic or Ashkenazi Jews. They are Mizrahi Jews, meaning Jews of Mitzrayim, from the lands of Ham. These people claim to be the displaced tribes from northern Israel during the first captivity, who did not return to Jerusalem after the Persian peace of Cyrus and Darius. Modern DNA suggests that if these people were displaced, it was most likely from India. And of course, India and Cambodia are closely linked to the cultures of Mesoamerica. In the series America is Egypt, Season 1, Episode 9, several parallels are drawn between the two, India and Mesoamerica. India's role should not be dismissed in their contributions to ancient history. But as far as Assyria goes, I offer my own personal template. Using 3 solid points of triangulation, we will identify 3 points of strong biblical locational reference and move from there. First, the location of the Tower of Babel. This spot can be seen above Earth, even on satellite. It is located in Quebec, Canada. According to the Book of Jasher, chapter 9, verse 38, the tower, after it was destroyed by a fire from heaven, left a circumference of a 3 days walk. The total circumference of this crater is just over 100 miles, which is precisely 3 days walk, traveling 12 hours per day at 3 miles per hour. A person could circumnavigate the former tower in 3 days' time. The mountain at the center of this crater is named Mount Babel. This area I propose is the former location of the Tower of Babel. The second point of triangulation is the Mississippi River, also known as the Great River or Euphrates. Most people think the Euphrates is located in modern-day Iraq, but the river in Iraq does not match the description given in Scripture according to Isaiah chapter 11. The Euphrates has 7 streams and its mouth is the Egyptian Sea, not the Persian Gulf or the Mediterranean Sea, which was then called the Great Sea, supposing itself to be the largest body of water on Earth. But we know now the largest body of water on Earth is the Pacific Ocean. The Euphrates has 7 streams and its mouth the Egyptian Sea, not the Persian Gulf. The Euphrates in Iraq has less than 5 minimal tributaries. The Mississippi has 7 major tributaries: the Mississippi, the Tennessee, the Ohio, the Illinois, the Red, the Arkansas, and the Missouri. The third triangulation point are the cedars of Lebanon, the largest, most grandiose trees in the world, the only trees on earth large enough to construct the Temple of Solomon. Remember, Solomon enlisted Hiram, king of Tyre, to retrieve the cedars from Lebanon for the construction of the temple. The tallest trees in modern Lebanon are dwarves compared to the great cedars of Lebanon in Northern California, the true location of ancient Lebanon. The Greek invaders amalgamated their language and lifestyle into Jerusalem. After the premature death of Alexander, Jerusalem was partitioned into Seleucid Babylonia. His empire was divided between his generals, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Jerusalem had become a tributary state. The process of Hellenization had all but completely infiltrated the city. According to accepted chronology, around 167 BC, Antiochus IV outlaws all Jewish religious rites and traditions, and additionally erects a statue of Zeus in the temple at Jerusalem. To add insult to injury, he sacrifices a pig on the altar of the temple to Zeus, thus completely desecrating the temple in Jerusalem. This act of wickedness set the stage for the Maccabean revolt. In less than 300 years after the revolt, the land changed hands from Seleucia to Caesar's Rome, and Jerusalem was finally sacked in 70 AD. The books of the Maccabees represent the Greek-Hellene transitional period of historical literature concerning these people and their histories. Enter Josephus, in the era of Gentile scribes. How long is truly between the sack of Jerusalem and the arrival of Europeans into the Americas? Even as early as 70 AD, it has been proven that America was the home to hundreds of different tribes and chiefdoms that thrived beyond the largest cities in Europe at the same damn time. The pre-Columbian civilizations of North America have long been dismissed as savage Siberian transplants who made no contribution to world history. But of course we know this is nothing more than a well-constructed lie propagated by the heathen. Archaeological, genetic, and even biblical evidence abounds connecting bloodlines across continents long before the year 1492, or even the Vikings. We investigate this mysterious reality with our evidence. In the previous episode, we discussed the Sephardic, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Moorish bloodlines of the Mediterranean and how their genetic markers are the predominant early European ancestry to the Americas. These are also the bloodlines mentioned in prophecy in reference to Tyre, Tarshish, Tartessos, Phoenicia, and Egypt. Many accredited academics, archaeologists, and historians from the past have built their entire bodies of work upon proving the connection between the people of America and the people of ancient Israel, Phoenicia, Syria, and Egypt. But any postulation that would potentially credit Americans with any relationship to these prior ancient civilizations was Eurostepped by the Chalco-Hamite delegation. Disproving these connections was essential for providing a revised version of world history, which had to be centered around the Mediterranean in order for the invaders to attest to their supposed historical precedents. It must be noted that only this area showed up on old world historical maps. Did no other lands exist? Did any land exist beyond Egypt? Was the Atlantic the entirety of Africa? Where's America? These people could not have been descended from the ancient Israelites, Egyptians, or even Assyrians, because if they were, what does that say about the people who have lived in these locations? We've already agreed that the Middle East is the ancient Holy Land, and we have the maps and the books saying such. That's where the cognitive dissonance kicks in, lending itself to absurdity and prefabricated falsehoods that began after the fall of Jerusalem and the creation of the Gentile Jerusalem that now sits in modern Palestine. Simply put, the geography of this region does not match the scripture from Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, and neither does the history of these people. In fact, by their own accounts, after the fall of Jerusalem, the city was abandoned. Yet, according to the prophecy in the book of Jeremiah, the city is in ruins, desolate, and uninhabited. So how could this location ever be considered such? But even the creation of Gentile Jerusalem was built upon fabricated origins that centered around Christianity. On his mission to establish Christianity around the year 312, according to the scribes, Constantine, Roman emperor born Flavius Constantinus, cool name Flavius, who had spent his entire life worshiping the pagan Greek pantheon, flips the script and starts endorsing Christianity throughout his entire kingdom. Quote, after allegedly seeing a vision of a cross in the sky, Constantine converts to Christianity and signs the Edict of Milan. He then sends his mother, Saint Helena, patron saint of difficult marriages and archaeology, to Jerusalem to search for Jesus' tomb. Let's take a quick pause to put these shenanigans into perspective. Roughly 200 years after the fall of Jerusalem and nearly 300 years after the death of Jesus, Constantine sends his mother to look for the tomb of Jesus. She not only finds the tomb, but she finds the cross fully intact, sitting right beside the tomb. The improbability of this story is only heightened by the fact that even the supposed location of Gentile Jerusalem was built by Hadrian 200 years before and named Aelia Capitolina. So if anyone should have found the tomb or cross, it should have been him. But no, it was Constantine's mama, Saint Helena, of difficult marriage and archaeology. Jerusalem was a completely Christian city from that time in the 7th century after the Muslim-Christian wars, when the Caliphate took control of the lands from India through the Middle East all the way to Spain. The proposed timeline between the creation of Christianity and the discovery of America has been exacerbated by the conqueror's chronology, which has added as much as 1,000 years of misleading and inadequate history between the supposed year 0, birth of Christ, and the Crusades of 1066. For more information on the deception of Western chronology, check out Timelines 1 through 3 or the work of Emanuel Velikovsky. The postulation of manufactured modern chronology is supported by mountains of evidence that unfortunately for certain people compromises their supposed antiquity. Yet the antiquity of the Americas can be proven legitimately through genetics, archaeology, and language. For example, the Uto-Aztecan language family shares its phonetic and scriptural roots with North Africa and has been classified by comparative linguists as part of the Afro-Asiatic language family. In short, Uto-Aztecan is a variation of languages spoken in Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Tunisia, and Egypt, with one key point that cannot be overlooked. The Uto-Aztecan language is a branch of North African Hamitic phonology that hasn't been used in that area in Africa in over 2,000 years, relating more so to the language of Carthage, spoken during the Punic Wars, circa 250 BC. But the natives of the Southwest were speaking this language long after colonization, when they were studied in the early 1800s. It must be noted that up until 1800, especially after the French invasion of Egypt, much of this script could not be deciphered. This point is only more solidified by the discovery of clearly Egyptian and Phoenician artifacts that have been uncovered in Uto-Aztecan territory, which encompasses a wide range from Idaho to Mexico City. This North African variation of script is even found in states like Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan. Most historians who found these artifacts still conflate their presence with vacation theories. In their assessment, North Africans only visited temporarily, yet their primitive form of phonology from 2,000 years ago was still spoken up until the 19th century. Why do scholars persist with the obvious lie? Indigenous Americans had no written language. The notion that these North Africans and Egyptians could have ever actually lived in America must be circumnavigated at any cost, regardless of the effort necessary to conceal such things. Many of these discoveries were made by avowed Eurocentrists and they offered their own postulations that avoided any notion that these populations had any ancient Egyptian roots. And even these top-notch Eurocentric historians like Barry Fell of Harvard were discredited by the rank and file of academia as fringe or pseudo because his findings didn't line up with their historical template. But now, due to modern innovation in comparative study, these connections can no longer be denied. Using just these limited comparative analyses, we can trace a sphere of Egyptian influence in pre-Columbian America. As early as the mid-1600s, when the French explored the Mississippi and into the St. Lawrence River, they developed relationships with natives under the guise of trade and fur trapping. As a result, they learned the early alphabet and script of the Iroquois and Algonquin languages. But it was only after the invasion of Egypt that the Micmac alphabet could be decoded, just to find that it resembled shorthand Egyptian or Coptic script that was used over 1,000 years prior. This highlights the reality that ancient people in the Great Lakes region and Ohio Valley were familiar with Egyptian at least 1,000 years before Europeans, who just lived across the Mediterranean from the location of Egypt. But wait, there's more. In addition to Egyptian script, Phoenician and Syrian script has also been uncovered amongst several nations from Brazil to New York. Beyond any doubt, Phoenicians had been long traveling to America and are most likely the source of the Moorish South Mediterranean Sephardic DNA that shows up in the genome of specific native groups. These are the people from Tarshish mentioned in the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And they were in America long before Columbus, yet shared the same bloodlines. The New World was not a secret. In Brazil, the Paraiaba stone was discovered. Again, this finding was discredited at first due to the ignorance the so-called scholars had about ancient languages. But due to this ignorant fact, it therefore made it impossible to forge, seeing no one at the time of discovery had the knowledge to do so. Not only has this artifact been authenticated, it has therefore dated itself to the reign of Hiram, king of Tyre, circa 535 BC. The Paraiaba stone reads, "We are Sidonian Canaanites from the city of the mercantile king. We were cast up on this distant shore, a land of mountains. We sacrificed the youth to the celestial gods and goddesses in the 19th year of our mighty king Hiram, and embarked from Ezion-Geber into the Red Sea. We voyaged with 10 ships and were at sea together for 2 years around the land of Ham. Then we were separated by the hand of Baal and were no longer with our companions. So we have come here, 12 men and 3 women, into a new shore, of whom I, the unhappy Metu Astarte, servant of the powerful goddess Astarte, have taken possession. May the gods and goddesses come to my aid." End quote. These men worship the Assyrian Babylonian goddess Ishtar, or her Hellenized name, Astarte, the Queen of Heaven. The land of Assyria would be east of the Euphrates, generally speaking, to the north and east of the Great River. The territory of ancient Assyria and Mesopotamia was often referred to as Akkad, and the people Akkadian or Akkadian. If we use the exact American parallel, we have a definitive location, the region formerly entitled Acadia, before it was colonized by the French. In the early 1500s, Verrazano called the coastal region north of Virginia Arcadia. Later, the French called the St. Lawrence region l'Acadie. The term Acadie has indigenous roots in the region that in no way can be attributed to Europeans. For the name still lives on in the region through places with indigenous names like Shunakade, meaning place of abundant cranberries, or Shubnakade, meaning place of abundant wild potatoes. However, the accepted location of Acadia in Iraq is Sandakade, place of abundant sand, or Dirtakade, place of abundant dirt. The location of ancient Assyria is the northeast quadrant of the North American continent, encompassing the upper Mississippi, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, all the way to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, going as far south as Washington, D.C., which could possibly be the location of Nineveh. It wasn't until 1853 when the white obelisk of Nineveh was supposedly recovered in the Middle East. The United States erected the Washington Monument upon the discovery of the white obelisk at Nineveh the very next year. But even beyond all the historical coincidences like the Plains of Abraham, the former name of Quebec City, or the 4,000-year-old Assyrian tablet possessed by Chief Joseph, who said it had been in his family for generations, there's even more evidence to this Assyrian-American connection. If there ever were a place today that could be considered Babylon, it would be New York City. If the root of Babylon descends from the conflation of the multitude of languages, no other place on earth has over 800 languages spoken in such a finite, small area. The tribes that were taken into Assyria went to these locations. Some biblical historians connect Mystery Babylon from the Book of Revelation with the Vatican. Why is the same story being told multiple times in Genesis involving the wives of Abraham and Isaac? If these stories are true, what is being told between the lines? Is deception cool? And are the wives of these men so beautiful that their husbands knew they would be taken? And is this practice common with other nations? Why are nearly half of all Ashkenazi Jews descended from just 4 women? Is this why they reconcile their generations through women instead of men, like all other Hebrews before them? Why did the tribes of the Southwest speak with an ancient African tongue? If Europeans had been ruling the Mediterranean for centuries, why couldn't their language be deciphered until after the 19th century? Why couldn't the French decipher hieroglyphics before the year 1800? How did they lose all knowledge of Egyptian history when it was so close by? How did their explorations down the Mississippi in the 1700s facilitate their campaign in Egypt? Why weren't the remnants of ancient Assyria discovered until after 1800 by the French? Shouldn't that area have been well known to Chaldean, Assyrian, Babylonian Catholics? Their origins date to at least the year 1500. And so-called Assyrian Jews claim their origins held from 500 BC. But no one in the area knew anything about Assyrian language or culture. Why is that? Meanwhile, in America, tribes are documented speaking ancient Assyrian, African, and Egyptian languages. But of course, this was dismissed because they say these people didn't even have a written language. Not only did tribes have written language, but the great empires of America dwarfed all other civilizations in sheer magnitude at the same damn time. During the height of Assyrian and Egyptian dominance, civilizations in America were thriving. From the Mississippi eastward, evidence abounds of the oldest civilizations in world history hidden by the charlatans of academia. What happened to these people? Is it possible that the Freemasons or Jesuits have something to do with the suppression of this knowledge? Where does Freemasonry originate? And what agreements were made between tribes, Masons, and Jesuits? The answer to these questions and more on the next episode of The Smartest Beast in the Field.
Molly, Mossy, Ghana, Asham, and Kush. Couple spots that gave me a push. Creek, Apache, Navajo, Maya, Paiute. Gave me the type of blood you cannot dilute. Don't mess with beats if I can find a loop. My history is a circle that you cannot dispute. Study Shaka Zulu, how we handled the truth. Broke everything that his enemy was planning to do. This ain't pride talking, I'm examining it too. Simple facts that some people can't handle the truth. Your genetics is a prophecy handed to you. Better deal with it before it starts handling you. To walk tall like you know it then. I study history. I know we got this shit on repeat. I know we got this shit on repeat. I know you got this shit on repeat. I know you got this shit on repeat.